The whole premise here is that you can increase your food intelligence, develop true nutrition wisdom. So what you are about to learn will help you become more empowered rather than discouraged by all the changing nutrition information out there. I know it seems well, probably not every week, but every season, every year, there's something else to kind of learn or follow or try. And I know I've done that for a number of years, and it's all good. It's all part of the learning. But this way, hopefully with this tool, this method that I'm about to share with you, you'll be able to avoid years of frustration, avoid poor health, and spending $100 on different fads or diets or this or that. And yeah, and I hope at the end of this session, you'll go, wow, that's really obvious. Because food and nutrition, in my view of it, should not be complicated. But yet, here it is, something our most basic of necessities, and it seems like we need a degree to figure out how to feed ourselves. Well, we don't need a degree. We shouldn't need a degree. There should be a very accessible, approachable level of understanding to be able to healthfully navigate the world of food and nutrition. And I know that's tough. That has been my journey. Ever since I was 16 is when I began down this path. I was at a time of your life when you're supposed to have all your youth, all your energy, and I could barely make it through a day. And it was the result of a certain decision I'd made, and I've been thinking about this for a while. It was a Tuesday afternoon, unlike any other. I'd come home, Mom was making dinner. I could smell the chocolate chip cookies cooling on the counter. I was slightly, a little bit nervous about this, but I'd made up my mind. I was pretty inspired about it. And I says, Mom, I'm gonna become a vegetarian. She says, wow, you're still gonna eat this supper, aren't you? I was cooking, meat, potatoes, typical kind of Scottish fare that was a part of our household, along with plenty of fast food, junk food that my brother and I loved. And in that moment, turned into a bit of a coming of age speech. My mom at the time was going through a divorce, and she says, Malcolm, I support you, but I can't help you. Right? She didn't know next to anything about diet, or certainly not a vegetarian diet. And as much as she supported me, she says, if this is your choice, then you're on your own, and I'll support you in any way you can. And so from that moment forward, I was responsible for my own food decisions. And what a wake-up call it was, going from meat and potatoes and junk food to just potatoes and junk food. Not a good idea. I don't regret it, even though within the very first 2 weeks, I immediately felt it. My energy went down. I was having blood sugar issues. Even there was a moment where I had like a fainting spell. I found it very tough to kind of make it through the day with enough energy. And that was a wake-up call to, wow, there's actually something more to food. Up until that point, food was literally whatever was quick, easy, and tasted good. I love things like breakfast cereals. Hey, I could eat those breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks in between, no problem. Fruit Loops, Lucky Charms, Frosted Flakes, all that good stuff. I mean, eventually I got into the healthier cereals like Weetabix and Corn Bran. And those are my kind of go-to foods. And the extent of my culinary abilities, because when I started to change my diet, I also got into this idea of whole foods, right? That came very quickly. Okay, if this is now not just about the environment, I now got to make it about my health. I got to learn to be able to create my own food from scratch. And at the time, the base that I was starting with was, I knew how the extent of my culinary abilities was I knew how to make Pop-Tarts, grilled cheese, and microwave pizza. And I know I'm not alone in that path. Many of us, what we receive as kind of the foundation for our kind of nutrition training, and to call it even a training is an overstatement. In grade 2, we go to the Canada Food Guide, right? That's about all you get in the education system. And if you get anything beyond that in the home, then you're lucky. Right? So Mom was very kind, very generous. Both my parents I love, and huge influences in my life, of course. And I've gotten so many of my greatest traits and values from them. But when it came to food and nutrition, I didn't get much. And I don't blame them for that, because that has been my journey for me to take on. And maybe you'd agree. I know Luca Simmons, a fellow nutritionist, she says, she was in a home and environment where she was taught the best of nutrition. She was fed everything from the garden. But as soon as she was a teenager, she rebelled, right? That's what we do. So even if my parents had given me all that, I'm sure I would have rebelled. I was in that stage wanting to go off on my own and find my own way. And food became my path, my journey. And spoiler alert, for although I was vegetarian for more than 10 years, down every different kind of a rabbit hole, from vegetarian to vegan to raw vegan. At some point, eventually, more than 10 years later, I did have to shift my diet. But what I learned along the way, and what I'm going to share with you today, is a way to kind of help fast track your success to arriving at what is the best food, what is the best diet for you, which is changing all the time. So what you're going to learn today, there's no dogma, right? We're going to go beyond the dietary dogma, beyond the nutrition trends. We're going to be able to follow our gut more than nutrition trends, and get to a place where we have this confidence and this inspiration that we know, and we know best, and that tuning into our body and bridging these two forms of intelligence that we'll get into, and making choices from that space. And that's the best place to be. If I were to give myself a label, it would be flexitarian or opportunivore. Yes, I no longer follow any sort of diet. There's a time and a place, and one can learn a lot from that. But to say, one size fits all or one diet fits all, we know that our bodies are much more complex than that. And we want to be in tune with our body as it changes day to day, week to week, month to month, season to season, year to year. What you eat now certainly won't be what you eat, I'm sure, in a year or 10 years. And it is so much more empowering and liberating to come from a space of this intelligent eating, developing your food intelligence. Now, this is a term that I coined, and I base it off the definition of emotional intelligence. We've all heard of this EQ, so we're going to get into what is FQ. So emotional intelligence, EQ, is defined as the ability of individuals to recognize their own and other people's emotions, to discriminate between different feelings and label them appropriately, and to use emotional information to guide thinking and behavior. So if we take that definition and we kind of flip it towards food, we can define FQ, food intelligence, as the ability of an individual to listen to the signs and signals of their own body, and to recognize and choose which food and nutrition information will best fit these needs. So what you're about to learn is a tool. It's something that I've developed over the years of being in this field of food and nutrition. And it's something that I still use to this day, especially as an owner of Light Cellar Health Food Store, where I'm presented with, all kinds of stuff, right? All the way from, new diets to new products. And I run it through this same criteria. Now, you can think of this, so we're going to get into it. It is an acronym. It is a lens, so which you'll be able to look at any food, any diet, and know if it's right for you. And each of these lenses are part of the picture. You can, in understanding each and the role that it plays, we can kind of put them together to get a nice full picture. And to me, this is about, there's something I picked up going through college, where I studied jazz music. So I got a jazz music degree because, in school, really, the only thing that I was so passionate about was music. And like many of us in this society, this culture, there was that expectation that you're going to go to school, you're going to get good grades, you're going to get a good job, you're going to be well paid. So, here I was as, 16, 17, going on 18-year-old. Parents are like, well, what are you going to go study? And I said, well, I'm going to go study music. And for me, up until that point, music was always a passion. It was my absolute passion. All I wanted to do was live, eat, and breathe music. And I was, in fact, primarily self-taught, more from ear and more from feel than I was the theory. And I'm going to use this music analogy, and we're going to transpose it once we develop the understanding over to the food and nutrition realm. And having this understanding is how I approach everything in life. Whether I'm learning a new art or skill or science, I feel this is kind of the highest place to come from. So in music, many of you I know, and maybe you were like this, knew somebody that grew up playing classical piano. Typically it's piano, but maybe it's some sort of instrument. Maybe they're in band, in school, whatever it is. And usually that approach, like my wife, started, learning the piano, music off the sheet, right? Beautiful. Can play incredible music. She went to a very high level, in the conservatory, the high grades, I think 8 or 9. I don't know how far it goes, but anyways, you learn all the theory, learn all the notes, you can read music, you can write music, and her ability to play the written music is quite phenomenal. And I definitely admire her for that, and any musician that has taken that path. Now, on the other hand, there's someone more like myself, and I had other friends that were even better at it than me, couldn't read a lick of music, but were somehow able to figure it out, right? They're the type of person that could just, jam to anything. They're playing by heart, they're playing by ear, just playing by feel. And again, they might not necessarily know the theory or what they're doing, but somehow they just have this touch, this ability to be able to play. And that's the approach that I had started with music. And as I went to formalize my learning of music and study, I had to then quickly, pick up on the theory and figure out, okay, what are the notes and what are scales and, so on and so forth. And that's entered into college. And as I got deeper and deeper and deeper into the learning, engaging like the intellectualism around it, myself and a number of other students, we got a little bit lost. We got a little bit lost in the theory and what was quote unquote right. So much so that it was in year 2, they had to bring in a facilitator. And it wasn't just us, it wasn't just our year, it was a very common experience where this man, he came in and he retaught us how to play just one note, right? To come back to that heart space, to come back to that really listening and that hearing and that feel, back to that feeling of music and get out of our heads. Now, if I were to ask you, which is the better one to play, right? Which is a better space to come from? Is it the intellectual theorization of music where you can play incredibly complex music off the paper? Or is it better to play from the heart and play from ear and just be more spontaneous? Well, it's a bit of a trick question because what I had discovered and what I have witnessed to be true is, in fact, it is the blending of those two, isn't it? Right? And that's what drew me to jazz music itself. To me, I felt that was the pinnacle of the expression of music because not only was it some of the most incredibly complex, complicated music, right? Where music theory, notes, very challenging, very hard to play, let alone understand, right? Even something like free jazz, where people just hear it as notes, just a gobbledygook of notes. These people playing that style of music are some of the most intellectually advanced when it comes to music. They understand the theory so much, so well, that they're able to take it out to the uttermost fringes that most people can't even hear it or understand it. So jazz to me had that element, and it also had the improvisation. Right? So the classic structure of a jazz music song is you play the head, which creates the form. It has the structure. You go through the chord progressions, playing the notes, establishing the song, and then boom, at the drop of a note, you're straight into solos. And all that theory and structure remains, but you're in this spontaneous free flow of magic, right? To the point that's beyond intellectual comprehension. And it's what is coming out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 50 musicians all harmonizing together is actually a magical phenomenon. So after venturing on from music and pursuing other areas of learning, in particular nutrition, right? For me, what started as kind of an inspiration and slowly more and more theory crept in, right? The science and learning about all the micronutrients and macronutrients and what I was supposed to have and combine and do and not do. It turned more and more into kind of a heady intellectual experiment where I got disconnected. I was back in that same place where I was with music, right? Where I felt disconnected from my food, where I felt, okay, well, I got to have this. It was all up in my head. And I had to come back to my heart and specifically to my gut to reconnect with my body and that intuition. So to me, the highest state in any pursuit is that merger of our rational mind, reason, the intellect, right? Logic, the scientific mind, the scientific inquiry that we so highly praise, merged with that intuitive, innate, instinctual self. So neither is right or wrong. Both are incredible, both allies. Of course, our culture likes to, more greatly revere and emphasize that it's all about the intellect. As a species, we put ourselves above everything else, saying, we're at the top of the evolutionary pyramid because us alone can think. Man has reason, right? All these poor animals that only have instinct. But I believe in humans, the ultimate is that merger of the two, right? So sometimes, we don't have access to a lot of that higher thinking and knowledge, and it's just pure instinctual, pure, right? Like how does a deer know what to eat? How does a baby begin to develop, right? There's certain instinctual knowing that we have within us, and then we develop that intellectualism to complement, to balance. So it's like, the two wings of the bird, the two eyes. We have two eyes, the left and the right. Let's use them, right? So whether you think of the left and the right brain, or the head and the heart and the gut, which are also have as much neurons and can be considered the second and the third brain. And there's a whole bunch of fantastic books, including one by a man named Stephen Howard Buhner. This isn't it. We're going to reference this one later, but he's got another book that goes into using the heart as an organ of perception, as a center of intelligence that we can navigate through the world of food and nutrition. And just like music, we don't have to choose one or another. It's about bringing together both. So that's what I feel that this tool that we're about to go into provides. It brings it together. And the best thing about it is it won't tell you what to eat, when to eat, or how much to eat, because that becomes the individual journey. But it does create a lot of focus, and it does create a lot of clarity. Again, so you'll be able to look at any diet or any food and know if it's right for you, and not blindly follow diets, nutrition trends, or be influenced by media or science or industry. You can be able to find out what is right for you. Okay, so let's get into it. So I call this a food scope. And so this is our acronym, again, lenses, through which you could look at any food, any diet, and know if it's right for you. And as we go through these, keep in mind that each are powerful in its own right, but you want to be able to look through all of these lenses, have them lined up, right? So the first one is science. Obviously, coming more from that intellectual side, right? Although, you know, the root of science always begins with that other way of knowing, right? How do we even begin? We begin with an inference. We infer, we have a sense, we have a thought, an inkling, some sort of intuition, a hypothesis that we want to then test out. We want to take through more of a linear way of thinking and checking and validifying, right? So initially there is that start. It has its roots in the intuitive side. So science will tell us two things, right, about food and nutrition. Very powerful, very wonderful. It can tell us what is in a food and what are its effects on our body. Now, with each of these lenses, we got to know that there are pros, there are cons, there are benefits, and there are drawbacks to each. And the other lenses are going to help balance that out. So with science, first of all, we got to know, especially when it comes to nutrition science, but can be said for all of science, right? It's an evolving, emerging field. We don't know it all. And I don't think science will ever know it all. I don't think science can know it all, because there are things outside the realm of science or that could be explained in this way. So we have to put it in context that it's new, that it doesn't know it's all. And though it can be very useful, insightful, inspirational, that it is just one part of the picture. And of course, we're not just eating and choosing foods based upon science alone, although some of us have maybe found ourselves there, right? Michael Pollan, who's a fantastic writer, New York Times food writer, best-selling author, who's done a lot of work within the field of food and nutrition, especially just simplifying it. He wrote a book called Food Rules, and he wanted to go back to, you know, these old cultural wisdoms, because he saw too much in our culture. There was so much confusion about food and nutrition, especially it getting too heady, too scientific, where you're walking down the grocery store aisle and you're thinking, okay, I need bioflavonoids, I need quercetin, I need this, I need that. And it becomes such an intellectual thing that we become disconnected from our food and disconnected from our bodies, because how do we connect to quercetin, right? What is that? Especially food, when it's such a personal, embodied experience, right? We can connect to smell, we can connect to touch, we can connect to taste, we can connect to the look of food, the feel of food, the smell of food. But quercetin, you know, how does that fit in, right? So there was a lot, including myself, could identify with this kind of over-intellectualization of nutrition. And I'd gone down that path being a vegetarian, where intellectually I could argue with you why it was the most perfect diet, but yet something inside me felt that it wasn't quite right, right? Something wasn't quite lining up all the way. But intellectually I had been convinced, and yet my body was telling me otherwise. So science tell us what's in a food and what a food or a diet has, the effects it has on the body. Now, most of us, and I'm guilty of this as well, when we look to science, oftentimes, not all the times, but let's say often, we only get just a little snapshot of science. Usually it comes in the form of a headline, right? It's very oftentimes kind of that doorway in. And do many of us actually really go beyond the headline? Do we go back into the study? Do we really dig deep and understand it? Who was involved? What are the other factors? Length of time, other foods, other herbs, lifestyle, so on and so forth. Very, very often we don't. We just get this little snapshot, right? The headline. And actually, in fact, it was funny, there was a study done by the New England Journal of Medicine, and they said that about 50% of media headlines about medical studies are totally wrong, and that many of these headlines don't accurately match the conclusions of the studies they cover. Or what about the studies that never get published? What about the studies where they didn't find what they were looking for, right? We lose so much of that learning from that. It doesn't reach us as general public. And oftentimes a lot of nutrition studies are done on animals, right? And there can be a lot of value, a lot of benefit in that. But I mean, how much actually applies to humans in mice models or rabbit models? Or imagine if we studied the toxicology of chocolate on dogs and came to that conclusion about us as humans, right? We'd be like, oh my gosh, this is definitely not a food to eat, right? It's clearly toxic, kills the dogs, but it has a different effect within us as humans. Other big thing about science too, there's two big areas, which is a lot of the studies are very short term, right? Maybe they're a week, maybe they're 2 weeks, maybe they're a month, maybe they're a year, maybe they're several years, maybe they're a decade, maybe they're several decades. But you know, the further we go out, the less and the less and the less and the less of actual studies have been done, right? So short term gives us just a little bit of a snapshot. And again, that's very, very different on the long term. And who was in the study, right? You know, that's just one of the challenges of science, especially in life, especially for humans, where we're so much more complex than just one little variable, right? That's kind of the scientific principle. If we want to go into that methodology and that process, we do it one variable at a time. But that's not really how life works. So how clear of a picture are we getting? And how close is your life and your conditions similar to those in the study, right? I can see a massive difference, especially where I've arrived at now, after being on this journey for so long. It's a very big difference compared to the lifestyle I have and you have and a lot of the rest of the society has, or the rest of the diet that they're consuming. So we got to put all that in perspective. And then there's also huge limitations in areas of science, especially when it comes to children and mothers, pregnancy, right? Rightfully so. There's a lot of kind of ethical questions there. So there's a huge amount of research that's not been done because of ethics. You know, herbology, it's one of the things, you know, people always ask all the time, right? Like, oh, I'm pregnant, I'm breastfeeding, you know, can I take this herb? You know, can I have that food? And the standard, you know, response is, if pregnant or breastfeeding, you know, like consult your doctor, because I can't say we don't know, right? There's no studies on it. And, you know, of course, there are some studies when there is a solid, at least historical precedent set that we know it's safe. Anything experimental, no, not going to go there, not going to touch that. So that's a huge, huge, huge gap. And, you know, I come up against that almost like every week. I get a question about pregnancy or breastfeeding, and it's a big gray area. So I have to refer to a different lens, which is our next one, which is very reliable. And in fact, if you could only pick one, and you don't have to, but if you could only pick one lens to really be the driver, really be the inspiration behind your food and nutrition choices, I would say this can offer us more than science, more than industry, more than government, more than any other influence, and that is of culture. Right? So I just mentioned, okay, with, you know, pregnancy, breastfeeding, if there's a historical precedence, awesome. There's a lot more assurity that, okay, let's actually really study, you know, reishi mushroom during pregnancy. You know, people have been doing it for hundreds of years, right? It's not such a risky area and so experimental as something that's never been consumed by that group. So culture provides an incredible source of wisdom that has been time tested, right? If something was wrong or it failed, then those people don't exist anymore. And this is one of the big insights that I got from my vegetarian journey. Once I began to kind of crack that open, and I don't think we'll get into it today, the kind of details of that journey and that story. But you know, now that I look back and I can use this lens, you know, looking at culture, I go, okay, was there ever a vegetarian culture? Yeah, absolutely, right? We have the people of India as an example, right? Very established vegetarian culture that successfully reproduced healthfully generation after generation. Vegan culture. Was there ever a vegan culture? You know, and back then I would have told you, it's like, oh, you know, there was the ancient, you know, Lemurians and of course the Garden of Eden, and you know, but it wasn't actually based in something solid and something tangible. The closest we have to a very strict vegan culture would be the Jains. So they're a subsect within India for very specific religious purposes. Their whole reason, their whole kind of basis is ahimsa, so non-harming. And so these are the people that wear a face covering because they don't want to actually breathe in a bug or an insect, and they sweep in front of them just in case that they don't step on anything living. Again, bug or an insect, snake, whatever it is. So they're living to this kind of high principle of ahimsa. Now, interesting thing about them is my wife Laura was doing some research about entomophagy, this whole eating of insects. And they recounted a very interesting story about the Jains, many of them who were living in India had emigrated over to Great Britain. And as they moved over, everything stayed the same, right? They were able to keep their traditional food and diet, everything, you know, eating their lentils and pulses and grains, you know, rice in particular. And within a short period of time of them moving over, many of them became anemic. They said, well, what's going on, right? Like the diet hasn't changed. All they done is, you know, move locations. And they started, you know, examining, looking a little bit closer at the diet. And what they found was, okay, in the kind of the modern world, industrialized world of England, their access to those same types of foods was a lot cleaner, shall we say, you know, polished grains, clean grains, so on and so forth, versus back home, back in India, it was much more done on kind of a local village scale, and how they stored the grains and all these different things, that there was actually a considerable influence of insects within those lentils, rice, pulses, and different grains. So much so that it accounted for key nutrients that they didn't even know they were relying on. So there's actually never been a vegan culture throughout the world. So that's a very important kind of clue. And not to say it can't be done, right? Maybe it can. But if we take that on, we have to recognize that we're the first, and it's an experiment, right? And maybe other cultures tried that experiment, but they didn't survive, right? They didn't make it to the next generation. And I'll talk a little bit about it in the next lens, some of the observations I was having around that. So culture is an incredibly powerful lens that we can examine, and we're going to dive deep into it today, what we can learn from culture and some of the valuable wisdoms and lessons from culture. But it also, too, has its limitations, right? Culture was very limited by time and place and resources, and we also live in a different time and place with different resources. So we can't necessarily, you know, just take what our ancestors ate wholesale and just apply it to us today, right? And this is the idea of intelligence, right? In more intelligently applying the lessons that we can receive from culture to ourselves, our situation today. But one of the biggest lessons I got from culture is the 4 food groups. And it turns out that every single culture around the world consumes food from these 4 food groups. There are, in fact, 4 food groups. I like to call it the ancestral food guide, the natural food guide. All humans consume some form of food from these 4 food groups. Now, if there's anything outside of this, I've been, keeping an open mind. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there's some sort of food outside these 4 food groups. Let me know. But really quickly, to kind of cover it off, we've got plants, animals, bacteria, and fungi. So those are the 4 food groups. And what I love about this, just like the food scope, it won't tell you what to eat, when to eat, or how much to eat. It's very individualized, but we can have it in context that we will, at some point in our day, in our week, in our month, need to consume food from one of these 4 food groups, right? All of these 4 food groups, sorry. And how we go about that really matters, right? So for me, if you had shown me this, in grade 2, when you're told, the standard American diet food guide, right? And you'd shown me this, and I said, I would have thought about it. Like, okay, sure. I'll eat lots of fruits. I eat, whole wheat. Well, it wasn't whole wheat bread. I eat bread. So there's some grains. I have some rice, vegetables, not many, but sure, they're in there. Okay, awesome, check, I got that. Animal foods, okay, well, ground beef, I eat hot dogs, I eat chicken breast, I eat eggs and milk, okay, yeah, no problem. Cheese, fungi, white button mushrooms on my pizza every once in a while. Okay, sure, yeah, got that. Bacteria, well, these are the fermented foods. So I would have thought about it. Okay, strawberry yops, yeah, orange cheese, maybe. Can that go in there? Check. I would have said, yep, I'm following the guide, aren't I? I'm getting all the food groups in. But of course, we know there's so much more depth than what I was eating and what most people are eating. And this is one of the benefits that I really got from being a vegetarian for so long, was I was just hyper focusing on the plant kingdom, and it forced me to go really deep into it. Because let's be honest, when I first started, to call myself a vegetarian is not correct. I was more of a carbitarian. Right? It was just literally one sugar source after another, be that, bread, cookies, pasta, you name it. And I wasn't eating, really any vegetation. So going into the plant kingdom and trying to diversify my diet to actually really eat vegetables and a diversity of them. So each one of these food groups, there's actually an incredible amount of diversity. And one of the biggest areas or ways we've gone wrong is we've really narrowed our diversity in the modern diet. And this actually brings up a good point. So I got very confused. It took me a long time to figure out how to feed myself, going down these different rabbit holes, trying this, trying that, and was doing some traveling in India and Nepal, very long kind of journeys through there, Scotland, England, exploring some routes, so on and so forth. And I'd come back after being in Asia for a good part of the year, quite sick. I'm sure I had parasites. I know, I'd gotten horribly ill while traveling over there. And I'd come back and I did a student clinic at Wild Rose College, where I went to go see Dr. Terry Willard. And the reason it was a student clinic is because it was the cheap consult, right? I came back, didn't have any money, just knew I needed some help, right? I was digestive system was still totally upset. And, I still really felt that I hadn't quite nailed my diet. And so, Terry's there and he says, oh, let me look at your tongue. And all the students, oh, look at his tongue and this and that, and kind of their case study, right? And as we got into diet, he says, Malcolm, if you're ever confused about what to eat, just go back to what your ancestors ate. I says, what? The Scottish? Right? They have a notoriously bad diet. These are the people that deep fry Mars bars. You can't tell me to eat like the Scottish. heart disease, obesity, diabetes. You know, if had I continued on that path, I know, I mean, like I mentioned, when I first started, you know, my journey, I had a lot of blood sugar issues, hypoglycemia. I was almost guaranteed on my path to developing diabetes. But of course, that is the modern Scottish diet, right? So the only reliably bad diet on this planet, right? If you want the top, your choice, your pick of the top, you know, lifestyle, diet related diseases of the day, you know, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, so on and so forth, right? The only reliably bad diet that will get you there is the standard American diet. But all other cultural diets are good diets and something that we can return to as a foundation to then move forward from. So a traditional Scottish diet actually looks very, very different than the modern Scottish diet. And the traditional Scottish diet, you know, is things like steak and kidney pie. And yes, of course, oatmeal and haggis and all these things. And it checks the box of key factors that every traditional diet has, which we're going to get into. So the modern industrialized diet is really where we've gone wrong, where we've decreased the diversity of the foods, the different types of foods that we're eating, and we've drastically reduced the quality of food, right? The only thing we've done is we've increased the quantity. We have an abundance of calories and a very minimal amount of nutrients. And that has caused the state of our society and culture and the state of the health that we have right now, which we know to be very poor. So this ancestral food guide, if we come back to, you know, traditional diets, which includes something from each of these 4 food groups and a much greater diversity. So let's just kind of quickly go through each of these to help gain a little bit more insight in how we can expand our diversity, increase nutrient density, and reduce calories, which is one of the very, very few ways that they have shown how to extend human lifespan. Calorie restriction, increasing nutrient density, right? If you can get more nutrients and less food, that is the whole name of the game. And that's what led me to, you know, starting the Light Cellar, following down this path of like, okay, where's the quality? Where's the goodness versus what is out there in the world? So plant foods, kind of a quick little hack to fast track your success, to maximize what is available in the plant kingdom, is to eat the rainbow, right? So Roy G. Biv plus black, white, brown, every color of food, plant food, represents different nutrition, right? Phytonutrients, plant nutrients. And every color is a representation of a different spectrum, a different nutrient, right? Within the orange spectrum, we know there's things like the carotenoids, beta carotene. The green, that's our chlorophyll. And we can go through each of those colors and find an array of different nutrients, right? And this is what science is great at discovering, right? And science discovers new chemical found in broccoli, known to cure cancer, right? Whatever the headlines are, as we go deeper and deeper into studying and analyzing the food, we're discovering more of these different nutrients and then the properties, the benefits that they have on us. So the phytonutrients, quick little hack, is the rainbow, that full spectrum. Now, within plant foods, you know, I mentioned things like grains, nuts, seeds, fruits, vegetables, sea vegetables, flowers, pollens, barks, roots. You know, I would challenge you to create an exhaustive list, keep expanding out different types of foods, and then begin to explore that. That's one of the characteristics of traditional diets, is they had, you know, easily, like even well up north, where you think, well, you know, they really only had, you know, seal and whale and, animal foods to live off. No, they even had a huge diversity of plant foods in their diet, far more than the modern diet has. Like, we've really reduced ours to an average of about 15 different varieties of foods. You go into the grocery store, and certainly the whole center of the grocery store, it's mostly based around wheat and corn and soy. And then as you go to the edges, okay, there's a little bit more diversity in the produce, but even that is so limited. Apples, which probably represent the greatest diversity in any grocery store of different types of varieties, because you got your galas and your Macintoshes and your pink ladies, and maybe there might be 4 or 5 or even 6. There are hundreds, potentially even thousands of different types of apples. Same with potatoes, thousands of different types of varieties, where we've really reduced our diversity of all these different types of foods. So another quick little hack is to get into the world of herbs, right? Consider herbs almost as a sub food group within the plant kingdom. And I was talking with one of the staff about this earlier this morning, where she was saying, like, it was Simone, her and Sonia, they have a great synergy together, because Simone's come at health from the herbal perspective and Sonia's come at health from the nutrition perspective. And I myself went down that path, where as I was going deeper into the health journey, I'd come back from India. Laura and I were pregnant at the time, and I hadn't given much thought to career, honestly. The only certification I had to my name was jazz music degree, which I knew probably wasn't going to be the most useful in providing for my family at that time. And so I was like, okay, I guess I'll, go back to school, get some certification. And I was at this crossroads of, like, do I study nutrition or do I go to baking school? And you can probably guess which path I chose. As much as I love baking and I was in the kitchen all the time experimenting, I would have made a terrible baker, because as much as I'm an intuitive eater now, I'm also very much an intuitive chef. And as you know, with baking, sometimes you got to be a little bit more specific, certainly more specific than I was. And I'm sure at that time too, my inspiration to become a baker was more my candida talking, again, searching out different forms of sugar and carbohydrates, because my diet wasn't very balanced at the time. So went down that path of nutrition, and initially, and here's a good point actually, when we talk about intelligent eating, even though I did that training and I have that certification, I've actually never used it. I've never called myself a nutritionist formally, because what I came to was that it put a barrier, right? It was like put me on a pedestal, because I know, right? I went to school, I have the training, I have the knowledge, and you don't. And I think that's very disempowering. Again, as I started, I don't think you need a degree. We shouldn't need a degree to be able to figure out how to feed ourselves. It should be something much more natural and much more intuitive than going down this path. Now, there's obviously always a time and a place for developing our intellect. That's part of the premise that I'm sharing here, is that, of course, there's always room. And I think there's onus on each of us as individuals. It's why you showed up, and it's why you're on the path that you are, is to take our knowledge, take our learning, just like in playing music. The more that we can develop that intellectual side and capacity, I think the better music we can play. But we don't want to lose touch with our innate intelligence, that intuitive side, that instinctual side, that really does actually know how to properly nourish ourselves. So going down that path of nutrition, I was of this mindset, okay, I'm going to become a nutritionist. My friend Yarrow, who I'd known for a number of years, his father, famous herbalist, he's going to herbal school and he's going to be a herbalist. And I'd kind of separated these two different paths. And, since I'm going this way, it's not really in my realm. I'm not, qualified to begin to play and explore in that realm. And that couldn't have been farther from the truth. It wasn't until much later a mentor of mine says, well, Malcolm, it's not about you becoming a herbalist, and having a practice. It's about you becoming your own herbalist. Yes, you may never see clients. and, you know, advise them on taking herbs. And if you want to go down that path, yeah, absolutely, you know, pursue the route that Yarrow did and become a certified herbalist and that type of thing. But herbalism has always been the people's medicine, the folk medicine, right? And just like the knowledge of nutrition, the knowledge of herbs and herbal medicine should be just as accessible. In fact, one of the definitions of herbalism is nothing more than the institutionalization of wild food intuition, right? So be your own herbalist and harness the power of plant medicine, right? Let food be thy medicine, medicine be thy food. And this really begins to open things up. And it will really much more deeply connect you to the plant kingdom. And what I love about the approach of being your own herbalist and developing actually your own herbal practice, if you think about that term, right? Again, this exact same person, it was Blaine and Drusick, he says, Malcolm, think of the term practice, right? Even a medical practice, just because they went to school for 4 years, right? Or 8 years, right? They're just practicing. It's a practice to figure it out. How do you get better at something? You practice. Right? You learn, you try it out, but you're practicing on yourself as your own herbalist versus putting on the coat and practicing on other people. So how we get into developing our own herbal practice is, this was something that came from David Wolf. He says, you know, choose herb number 1 of X system, right? So something like, you know, the Chinese herbal system. And this is where kind of culture comes in again. Is you can either go down the path of your own lineage, your own culture, right? So for me, that would be kind of like, you know, British folk herbal medicine, which is incredibly rich. There's a lot there. It's been maybe not as developed, or it's been challenged over the years with things like the witch burning and, you know, like so much kind of institutional suppression of it. But there's an incredible wisdom there. We can also, you know, pick a different culture, right? I was really into yoga, traveled to India, so I might explore Ayurveda. What's really caught my attention is Chinese herbalism. I've also been down to South America and into the Amazon, and then that fascinates me. It's like, whoa, this is so cool, right? And that knowledge, that cultural wisdom is absolutely incredible. And we have access to it. Not only do we have access to the knowledge, but we have access to the herbs itself. And there's that saying, the herbs don't work unless you take them. Compliance is key. Right? So just as much as we can start to learn about the herbs, what's even more important is to start to take the herbs. And we'll get into that principle in the last lens, which is applying it to yourself and what wisdom arises and what knowledge and intelligence arises from direct experience, personal experience. So regardless of what you choose as a herbal tradition, I also would encourage you to layer on that, wherever you live, study indigenous plant knowledge, right? So and nutrition as well, right? So how did the people that were indigenous to this landscape, right? Indigenous, what does that actually mean? To be of a place. Friend of mine says, well, I'm, you know, yes, I honor and respect the First Nations, and I'm the second nation, right? I want to be indigenous to this place, to be of this place. And I will look to and revere the First Nations knowledge for their indigenous knowledge, their wisdom. How did they survive, right? Without grocery stores, without pharmacies. Every single plant, every single animal played a role in their life and in their nourishment and their healing, right? So wherever you live on this planet, begin to tap into that indigenous cultural knowledge that allowed them to thrive here for hundreds or thousands of years. That's incredible cultural wisdom that we can and should tap into. So going on plant walks, right? It's going to much more deeply connect you to the place that you live when you begin to see the life around you as connected to your life. So sure, study the Chinese system. And like David said, right? Here's a system that's got over 1,000 probably more, of different herbs in it that over all those years has been so well codified and categorized and studied on all these different levels. And they've got kind of a hierarchical system. So they've got their superior herbs and they have their inferior herbs. Well, why go to the inferior ones? These are the ones that, yeah, it's a bit of a gray area. It's like everything's medicine, everything's poison. The only difference is dose. You better know what you're working with and how it's going to affect your body. And you're going to need a little bit of guidance as you practice in that realm. But the superior herbs, they have much superior qualities. And why not go for herb number 1, 2, 3, or 4 versus herb number 437? So just go to the top, leverage that cultural knowledge, that cultural wisdom, and yeah, leverage and accelerate your knowledge, your path. So plants, eating the rainbow, using herbs as kind of a sub food group. Animal foods. Now, this one, we got to keep in mind that all of the kind of vegetarian inspiration that I had was really only a half truth, right? Everything for the environmental reasons, everything for personal health reasons, everything for animal rights, you know, all the reasons. There's a great book by Leara Keith called Vegetarian Myth. And she dives right into this, where there's always this other side. So the argument is less plants versus animals, and it's more about the system that it comes from, right? So industrialized agriculture of monocrops of canola, soy, wheat, you know, corn, you name it, right? Not good for your health, not good for the environment, on and on and on and on. Versus is just the same as, you know, cows in a feedlot, right? Horrible, the whole thing. But locally raised, grass-fed, hormone, antibiotic-free, like natural food, right? Raised naturally, cared for. There are key nutrients in animal foods, just as there are key nutrients in plants, bacterial, and fungal foods that you cannot get from any other kingdom. Now, this doesn't say that you need to eat steak. It doesn't say that you need to eat milk. It doesn't say that you need to eat eggs. It doesn't say that you need to eat fish. It doesn't say that you need to eat insects, but there's something from that animal kingdom that you need, and you just need to find the food that works for you. Right? I spent years demonizing dairy, right? Milk is murder. Nothing but, you know, it's inflammatory, it's mucus producing, it's da 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 da. And then I drank raw milk and it felt incredible, right? I had to kind of re-examine. Well, it's like, well, it's a different food. You know, grass-fed raw milk is very different than what I was raised on, right? You can't, it's not apples to apples. They're two completely different foods, right? Chicken is not chicken. What system did it come from? What, you know, breed or genetics is that chicken? What was it fed? How did it live its life? All these other influences the quality of food. And of course, you know, we're all into whole foods, but how many people do you know that eat animal foods don't eat the whole animal, right? That causes an imbalance. That causes a lot of the issues of that we can easily point to animal foods like, oh, no, it's a bad food because of this X, Y, and Z. Well, it's because of all these other factors. So with animal foods, you really do want to think whole food, and that's nose to tail, right? So that is organs, that is bones, and everything in between, not just muscle meats, not just chicken breast or whatever it is. It's the skin, it's all of that. And it's everything from four-legged creatures to two-legged creatures to insects to fish to you name it. Bacterial foods, meaning fermented foods. This is, again, another absolutely proven thing. Sandor Katz, who's known as the fermentation revivalist, he has made it his mission and an absolute study of cultures all around the world. And it has been proven that every single culture around the world, barring none, consumes foods that have been fermented. And it was only our kind of modern industrialized diet where we moved away from it, right? Oh, we don't need to ferment, right? We've got shipping, we've got access to food 24/7. We got refrigeration, and we missed out on this key source of nutrients. And so with fermented foods, we want to make sure that we consume live culture ferments, right? That have those living probiotics. It doesn't always have to be living, right? There's benefit to fermented foods that we cook, right? Like sourdough bread or tempeh, because there's a transformation of that food by the bacteria that increases the nutrients, their digestibility, and also deals with maybe certain anti-nutrients, right? Like enzyme inhibitors, like phytic acid, even things like the lactose in dairy or the gluten in wheat. The bacteria make it more digestible. And it's an absolutely key food group to be consuming, just the same as fungi, which represents, again, both food and medicine, and is the whole kingdom, all the way from single-celled yeast to these great polypores, the medicinal mushrooms that we hear so much about these days. It's everything in between, both food and medicine. Right now, there is a fifth food group, because there's always the fifth sacred thing, right? This one, actually, I would say even supersedes these four food groups. So this is the primary elemental food groups, which is earth, air, fire, and water. These are obviously, literally nutrients, things we cannot live without, right? How long can you go without air? Okay, it's seconds, it's minutes, maybe if you're really good at holding your breath. Water being that next most fundamental nutrient. Earth, right? What do they say about astronauts? They can only be up in space for so long. When they come back, right, we need that element of earth, both from an energetic point of view, right, from the aspect of grounding and the Earth's electromagnetic field, from gravity, everything that it provides, as well as literally not figuratively, literally eating earth in the case of, let's say, salt, in the case of dirt, in the case of clays. Indigenous people consume earth. And oftentimes, you know, us modern humans, we've gotten away from that, disconnected from that in the case where it starts to show up as an instinctual drive, like a mother, right? And the cravings, or a child. But how many times does little Johnny get slapped on the hand for eating dirt? Does it reinforce and it take away that instinctual drive that, oh no, dirt is dirty, I shouldn't eat it? But every culture consumes that. And then fire, it's the sun, it's the source of all food, all nutrition, things like vitamin D synthesis, the infrared healing that we get from the sun, absolutely essential. So any thoughts, any questions on that? We got a couple of comments here. Oh yeah, okay, great question. So Donna asks, would you explain which group algae like spirulina and chlorella fit into? Okay, I would put that in the plant kingdom. And you know, these are kind of big generalizations, because you know, nature's obviously not in boxes. And what you'll find is that there are organisms that are actually not one, but two, or they cross kingdoms. So for instance, lichens are a cross between plants and fungi, or algae and fungi. If you've ever drank kombucha, right, and many ferments, they're actually not purely bacterial cultures or fungal cultures. They're a mix of the both. SCOBY is actually an acronym that means symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. So, and if you look at, I call these like the four kingdoms, right? The four kingdoms, food groups. Technically, scientifically, there are 6. I'm sure that's going to change depending on how we classify or reclassify. And I believe the algae have their own, like spirulina, chlorella, they have their own kind of classification. But I've grouped them in with the plant kingdom, right? They're photosynthetic life forms. Oh, yes. Ashley says, love you could give a bit of guidance around incorporating fermented foods into one's diet. I love them. Yes. Awesome. Sauerkraut, kimchi, kombucha, but I always get such an upset stomach when I consume them. Is it something we just need to get used to over time? Yeah. Great question. So some people, especially, yeah, as you're experiencing, just introducing fermented foods can actually make things worse. Now, I like to generalize and say that, 9 out of 10 people or even higher, simply just adding in ferments to their diet, their health will improve. Now, there are certain individuals that will actually make things worse, and that could be an issue of histamines. Now, fantastic resource for you is Luca Simmons, that's Symons, and her partner, Tracy Reed. They have a business called Histamine Haven, and they specialize in this, right? When ferments makes things worse, they really dive into what is going on, and they can kind of guide you through that. Now, it could be histamines, or it could just be too much of a good thing, right? And just a slow introduction. But I would maybe pull back anyways and just kind of do small amounts, right? So what's the amount that you can have where you're not getting that upset kind of funky digestion? And for some people, that's, I've heard stories. Another woman, Deborah Morgan, does consults one-on-one, where sometimes her clients, it's literally just a drop of sauerkraut juice into water, and they slowly build from one drop. So that's obviously a bit more of a specialized case, someone like Deborah, someone like Luca, where they really have the training, the expertise to help guide you along that path. Sometimes you need to step back. You need to do what's called healing and sealing the gut. So fantastic protocol is something called GAPS, the gut and psychology syndrome, because many of us, right, we're entering into this path of health, nutrition with challenges, right? Let's be honest. I mean, I had a ton of challenges, and it took me a long time to try and figure it out. So sometimes we need to kind of take a step back, do some serious healing, follow very specific protocols and diets, utilizing the help of practitioners that have that experience that can guide us. GAPS is a great resource. Gut and psychology system, healing and sealing the gut. And if you talk to anybody, even Luca, Tracy, Deborah, they're all kind of have foundation in GAPS, even if you're exploring something like, histamine issues. So yeah, if ferments are an issue, start really small, try and find where is that point that you don't, and then just slowly increase. But if you want to kind of fast track that success and get a little bit more insight, I would reach out to a practitioner like the ones that I've mentioned. Now, with the ferments, I think a key point, hopefully, that we've illustrated through plants and through animals and so on and so forth, the key is diversity. You're starting off with good selection, good variety. When someone says like, oh, I don't like sauerkraut. Okay, sure, try something else, right? There's so much out there that we can explore within the realm of ferments. And each ferment will have a different range of bacteria, which is part of the fun, part of the game, right? Of getting that diversity of bacteria in. And then, of course, it's not just all about eating bacterial foods. My friend Yaro, who I've mentioned a couple times, he's got this kind of fun analogy of, you can't just throw the yuppies into the ghetto, right? They're just not going to survive. Like if you're on, and I'm not saying you actually at all by any means, but if you're on like a junk food diet and you're like, oh, I've heard about ferments are good, I heard about probiotics are good, you're eating McDonald's and you're just popping some probiotic pills, or you're eating a little bit of sauerkraut on the side, the longevity of that, you're not going to be as successful, because you actually need to create the terrain, the environment where those good bacteria can thrive, right? Again, yuppies into the ghetto. What happens? Well, they get beat up, they get robbed, like they're out of there. They're like, ooh, this is not hospitable. Sometimes it can cause a little bit more turmoil than benefit. So it's all about resetting the terrain to then, and, shifting one's diet back to more kind of natural foods And because that's what these probiotics thrive on. They need prebiotics. Well, what are prebiotics? It's fiber, you know, something that's really missing in a lot of the modern standard American diet. Okay, Donna says, one of the naturopaths, yes, Dr. Melina Roberts, she's amazing. She's given classes here at Light Cellar. She said that to start some of her clients on just a finger dipped into fermented brine and working up to larger amounts. Yeah, thank you so much, Donna, for that. Okay, so we've gone through science, we've gone through culture, and again, culture is a big one. I will just mention here, actually, I've got a whole other section I would really want to cover about culture and the insights. So this is one of the most fantastic, most amazing books, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. Really quickly, this is Weston A. Price, who was a dentist back in the kind of turn of the last century, who was in such a unique time where he was able to observe, because remember I said the only reliably bad diet is the standard American diet, the modern industrialized diet. So he was at a unique time where he's able to observe the industrialized diet entering into traditional indigenous communities who had their traditional cultural diet. And then all of a sudden the industrialized diet comes in and it wrecked them. It wreaked havoc on them. And how did he know? Well, it was in the teeth. Within one generation, he saw people's teeth going like that, right? All kinds of dental cavities, deformities. Whereas the people that previous and those that kept and maintained the traditional diet, he was shocked. Like incredible teeth, incredible strength, physique, regardless of where he was, whether he was in Africa, whether he was in Asia, whether he was in Europe, you know, in northern Scotland or Switzerland or in the Amazon. Those that had and consumed the traditional diet had incredible teeth, incredible healthy physique, and as soon as they switched to the modern industrial diets, right, as the refined grains and the refined sugars and all these things started coming in, he was very clearly, easily could see that their health went downhill. And so that's what led him to do a ton of research, and it has been carried on by groups like and individuals, Sally Fallon, who founded the Weston A. Price Foundation. So she's written this book here, but really all that research comes from Weston A. Price, the Price Pottinger Foundation. And so he discovered that there are 11 key characteristics of all traditional diets, right? So I kind of went over my interpretation, but we're now going to get into just a few more specifics here. Okay, so this is just a sheet that I printed off the Weston Price Foundation. And we're going to really quickly, the 11 characteristics of traditional diets. The diets of healthy, non-industrialized people contain no refined or denatured foods or ingredients, such as refined sugar, high fructose corn syrup, white flour, canned goods, pasteurized, homogenized, skimmed, or low-fat milk. No refined or hydrogenated vegetable oils, no protein powders, no synthetic vitamins or toxic additives or artificial colorings. Now, as I mentioned with culture, you know, we don't want to say that, oh, all cultural diets are perfect. I mean, they were damn good, right? And they allowed people to successfully reproduce generation after generation. They're a great foundation. If you ever get confused about what to eat, go back to what your ancestors eat. But they also had their own limitations. You know, who knows? Just because they didn't eat these things, right? Synthetic vitamins or protein powders. I mean, we know from science, from observation and experience, that a lot of what is described in there isn't good, but just because they didn't have it doesn't automatically make it bad, right? And there was also cultural prejudices, right? Where every culture, you know, thinks what they have is the best. What someone else is doing is kind of weird. You know, if we talk about ferments, you know, the Western cultures will look at Eastern cultures and go like, ooh, you eat that? That's kind of weird, right? The natto, the tofu, the this, the that. And the Eastern cultures might look at Western cultures and go like, ooh, you eat that? Like blue cheese, you know, like, or whatever it is. So there can be cultural prejudices as well. Anyways, moving on, characteristics of traditional diets. Number 2, all traditional cultures consume some sort of animal food. I talked about that, such as fish, shellfish, land and waterfowl, land and sea mammal land and sea mammals, eggs, milk and milk products, reptiles, and insects. The whole animal is consumed. Muscle meat, organs, fats, bone, with the organ and meats and fats preferred, right? Where in our industrialized culture, right, it became a status symbol, right? Oh, I don't need to eat that offal, that offal, as they call it, the organs, the bones. No, we don't need that. We're just going to eat ribeyes, and we're just going to eat chicken breast, and we're just going to eat, selectively just taking pieces because we're so wealthy and we have this abundance. We can be picky, but that came as an absolute downfall. The organ meats and the fats, specifically, these traditional cultures, they knew how precious and how nutrient dense they were, so much so that every traditional culture and diet had a special foods, and actually we'll get to this, I think that's one of the things that we're going to come up to later, remember I mentioned about like pregnant women, right? Expecting couples, even in the preconception, conception, gestation, and then postpartum. There were special foods that they were fed to prepare themselves, optimize nutrition, and then to help recover. And they gave themselves very specific amount of time afterwards to really replenish their bodies before having another child, right? Daniel Vitalis, remember him talking about DHA, these long chain omega-3 fatty acids. He's like, this is your dowry. This is something that you're, passing on to your children, right? Like when a woman creates another being, she's creating it out of her own body. All the nutrition that she has available is being passed to that offspring. There's a fantastic book called Deep Nutrition, and they talk about, and I'm the second child, I can attest to this. My brother, he got way more nutrients than me. Case in point, this book, Deep Nutrition, they study famous siblings, right? The first compared to the second, and a first always gets the most nutrition and ends up having a better immune system. And in the case of me and my brother, he has never, ever had a cavity. Me, my mouth, I've been riddled with cavities my whole life. And I chalk that up to nutrition. What I did or did not receive, he got more nutrition being the firstborn. My mother was never taught about nutrition. She wasn't eating intelligently in that way. She didn't replenish her stores, and therefore I didn't get as much of those vital nutrients. And that book, Deep Nutrition, Shanahan, I believe, are the authors, they go through with some kind of famous examples where you can really see it. You can see it in the structure, the bone, the jaw, teeth crowding, all that stuff. So really, really, really interesting. Okay, the diets of healthy, non-industrialized people contain at least 4 times the minerals and water-soluble vitamins, and 10 times the fat-soluble vitamins found in animal fats. Vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K2, which he didn't know at that time. He didn't know what that was. He just called it activator X. There was something that was very specific in their diets that played such a crucial role, specifically in bone and teeth development, and it's been discovered that this is vitamin K2, different than vitamin K1. This is one of the things I got into and realized why animal foods have very specific nutrients that you cannot get from any other kingdom. Yes, you can get beta carotene, sure, in abundance, but your body's got to convert it to provitamin A, true vitamin A, retinol, which is fat soluble. So you have to consume enough beta carotene with fat to be able to make the conversion, and it's got to be enough beta carotenes. Not everyone can do that. Children can't do it. It's something that develops as you grow. So like infants and young children, they don't have the ability to convert the beta carotene to vitamin A, vitamin D, right? D3 and all that stuff, right? It's in animal foods, animal fats. Same with vitamin K. So vitamin K1, sure, you can get from leafy greens, but vitamin K2 is the fat-soluble form. It's so much more powerful and potent and effective, and it's only available in, actually, I got to correct myself. Vitamin K2 you can find in fermented foods, specifically soybean natto. Yeah, that's one of the best sources of vitamin K2, but it's also in abundance in animal foods. All right, so they had 4 times the minerals and water-soluble vitamins, 10 times the fat-soluble vitamins than our modern industrial diet. All traditional cultures cooked some of their food, but all consumed a portion of their animal foods raw. So every single culture around the world consumes some form of animal food raw, right? So whether that's raw milk, raw eggs, raw meat, raw organs, raw bone marrow, raw cod liver oil, whatever it is, some portion of their animal foods was consumed raw, and they all cooked their foods. Primitive and traditional diets have a high content of food enzymes and beneficial bacteria from fermented vegetables, fruits, beverages, dairy products, meats, and condiments. Number 6, seeds, grains, and nuts are soaked, sprouted, fermented, or naturally leavened to neutralize naturally occurring anti-nutrients such as enzyme inhibitors, tannins, and phytic acid, right? So nuts, seeds, grains, nuts. Again, this completely goes against what we do in the modern world is we take raw almonds, we blend them up, and we turn them into almond milk. Right? Traditionally, they would have been soaked, they would have been sprouted, they would have been fermented. This is one of the big issues with grains. People are like, oh, I'm, you know, I can't do grains, I'm grain-free, or I'm gluten sensitive or intolerant. It's because you got to ferment that thing first. You got to turn it into sourdough, make it more digestible. They never just took the grain and ground it up into flour and made bread. Total fat content of traditional diets varies from 30% to 80% of calories, right? None of this low-fat fad diet that so many of us were on for decades, absolutely insanity. All traditional diets range from 30 to 80% of calories. And only, here's the other side, the flip side of that, only about 4% of calories came from polyunsaturated oils, naturally occurring in grains, legumes, nuts, fish, animal fats, and vegetables. Right? The balance of fat calories in the form of saturated and monounsaturated. So this idea of canola oil, you know, vegetable oil, which is soybean oil, I mean, it's absolutely toxic. Traditional diets contain nearly equal amounts of omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. Number 9, all traditional diets contain salt, right? I mean, you go through all these principles and you look at what is kind of espoused in the modern diet, and you just do the opposite, right? Low salt, low fat, you know, high vegetable oil, all this stuff is the complete wrong direction, and look at the results. Number 10, all traditional cultures make use of animal bones, usually in the form of gelatin-rich bone broths. Number 11, traditional cultures make provisions for the health of future generations by providing special nutrient-rich animal foods for parents to be, pregnant women, and growing children. Also proper spacing of children, and by teaching the principles of right diet to the young. So there's the 11 principles that Weston A. Price had discovered. They're in the book, but they're also on the Weston A. Price Foundation website. So key insight into culture and cultural diets. All right, so moving right along. Oh, I am now making this, I've changed how I word this, but I've now actually got the one that I'm gonna use. It can be many things, but I'm using the umbrella observations. So this is the lens. You're gonna observe others, right? You're gonna observe other beings, other people, specifically getting their opinion from their experience. So you can absolutely very quickly fast track your success. You're totally confused. I like to give the example of Victoria Butenko. Her and her family moved from communist Russia to America, the land of abundance, the land of a free prosperity, so on and so forth. Great. It's wonderful. They came from a society where it was a challenge, to get bread, right? It was a challenge to put food on the table because of living in communism. Coming to America and living the American dream, it was incredible because you go into the grocery store and not only is there such a huge abundance of food, but this is incredible. It's so scientific. You pick up any box and it tells you all the nutrients in there. It's been fortified and it's delicious. And, and they went to town and they ate the standard American diet. And very quickly, very soon on, all four in the family were diagnosed with some sort of lifestyle disease, right? Heart disease, arthritis, obesity, diabetes, and they were just given medication and say, well, yeah, of course, just take the pills and away you go. The mother, Victoria, didn't accept this. She says, what can I do? I'm not just going to accept that I have to eat these pills for the rest of my life and I'm going to have heart disease the rest of my life, however long or short that's going to be. And so she set about trying to figure it out for herself. And one of the methods that she did is she went around and she started asking people, right? So, I've also described as opinions. And I like observations better. So you observe somebody, right, who's looks healthy, who's looking amazing, right? And she would go up to people in the lineup in the bank, or she'd be in the grocery store, like, what's in your cart? What are you eating? It's obviously working for you. I need some guidance. And she started to piece it together from that way. And we've all been there, right? In the case of asking someone that we admire, learning from them, and that fast tracks our success. So a good example I give is I would never have dreamt of drinking wild water, right? Like just straight out of the ground. I mean, we're taught to fear water, right? That, it's going to be contaminated. It's not safe. It took me observing my very healthy, robust, friend who I deeply admired and respected saying, no, like this is what I do all the time. And it's the best experience ever. To take that cup and put it right up to the ground and drink the spring water. And, the light bulbs went off. It's like, wow, how did I not know about this? So fast tracking our success. We can get off track. We can be led astray if we don't think intelligently. And this is one area that I learned kind of very humbly, which, I was into vegetarian, vegan. I was kind of the raw vegan stage. And I dragged my wife and my very young daughter down this path with me because I was so inspired. I was like, this is the way, this is how we're supposed to eat, raw foods. I'm never going to cook my food again. I totally missed out on this cultural lens and everything we just talked about. But that point aside, because I was so inspired by others, like this lady over here who had the weight loss transformation, and then this person over here who cured their cancer, and then this person who didn't, only had to sleep 3 hours a night because they had so much energy. And I was so inspired. I was like, well, okay, this has got to be the way. And as I started to go down that path, I got some initial inspiration and energy and excitement. I was like, yeah, this is it. And what I didn't realize, what I didn't put into context is who I was looking at and comparing their individual situation to my own individual situation. And most specifically, my wife's individual situation and my daughter's individual situation. What we just talked about, right, was that traditional cultures had a very specific diet for mothers, for young children, because they have very different needs than does, someone in their 30s or in their 20s, or someone that has been obese their whole life and they go on a raw food diet and they turn that around in 6 months, and then they start writing books and that they're proclaimed experts that this is the way that we should all eat, right? So I wasn't looking at it from that long-term perspective. I talked a little bit about that from science. A lot of it's a very short-term perspective. What are the effects long-term? Well, it turns out, from a raw vegan perspective, there's very, very, very few. And it took sitting in a lecture where my friend Daniel, he did this experiment. He says, okay, how many of you know somebody that's been vegan for, 1 year? Okay, everyone's hands are up. How about 5 years? Many hands go down. How about 10 years? More hands go down. How about 15 years? One person. How about 20 years? Okay, nobody, right? So long-term, right? There might be some success and inspiration short term, but there isn't that long-term success. So observations we need to put in perspective. How similar are they to me and all those different factors? And can I reliably, follow their advice? This is the other reason why I like observations, where I expanded it, because I used to just say it was others, opinions of others, which is part of it. But the other observation, and this came from Stephen Herod Buhner, as well as the kind of the herbal tradition. And we've been talking about some of their cultural wisdom. And how did they know? How did cultures discover all this, right? Well, they didn't really have science. They had, knowledge that was passed down, right? That they kept, they encoded within their culture. That was wonderful. But how a lot of that was discovered, part of it we're not going to get into, and that's using the heart as an organ of perception, and this idea of plant communication. That was absolutely 100% how they attain that knowledge. And that's why I started, when I talk about science, is like, well, you can't know everything from science. There's other ways of knowing. And this is more this kind of intuitive side. Well, there was also observation. So a great example is horny goatweed, epimedium. It's a very famous Chinese herb that, guess what? Why did they name it horny goatweed? It's because, the goat herders, they take their goats up into the fields. What they noticed was they would observe the goats would go after this particular plant, right? They'd eat a bunch of it, and then they all get like frisky. And the goat herders going like, wow, maybe I should try that, right? Like, that looks like fun. So, he tries it. And it was through that observation of others, of nature, of animals, and then trying it as well. So powerful lens there, but again, all in context: science, culture, observations. And then our last one, and then we'll kind of finish on this, is personal experience. And this to me is really where the rubber hits the road, right? Because regardless of what science says, what culture says, what others are doing and their observations of that, really it comes down to what works for you, right? So we've had, this conversation around fermented foods. I've just said, right? Every culture, every person needs to eat fermented foods. Science says it's so wonderful, but here we had an example. It was like, wow, but that's not working for me, right? So within her personal experience, this is where it changes, right? Where it needs to become individualized. And this is also the intuition, right? That part. And it's about using all those lenses, putting them all together, that we get that intelligent eating. We can come and approach our diet. We can follow our gut more than nutrition trends, and really customize it. So this here, to dive into the personal experience, will be its own class in terms of intuitive eating, right? What is that concept? How do we truly get there? Tapping into our intuition, using our innate intelligence, our instincts to navigate that. This was more about, the blend of that with, science and things outside of us, putting it all together. So I'll do another session on, a deep dive into intuitive eating, but that is really kind of where the rubber hits the road. But I personally feel that, especially in this day and age, we can't just eat from, just like we can't eat just from science alone, we can't also eat from intuition alone, right? We'd be foolish not to heed the wisdom and advice of all these influences, right? For me to walk into the forest and say, you know what? I don't care what science or culture or other people say about this mushroom. If I haven't experienced it myself, and who knows what will result in me eating that mushroom. But intuition, of course, does play a very, very key role. So we will get into that another time. I know we've actually gone over time. Maybe I should make this more than 90 minutes. Maybe it's 2 hours to really kind of deep dive into it. But the intuitive eating, if you guys are interested, I will set that out for a date coming up very soon. And we can do a similar evening, similar session like we've done tonight, really deep dive into that. What does it mean and how do we start it? How do we get into that practically, tangibly, that intuitive eating? So thanks everybody so much for joining us. I know Vivian had to leave a little bit earlier. Appreciate you guys being on. Thank you, Donna, Ashley, Jamie, Liz, Mike. It was a pleasure to hang out with you this evening.